Imagine discovering a text so dangerous that religious authorities banned it for over 1,000 years. A book that claims angels personally delivered its words to Moses on Mount Sinai. A book that reveals time itself is being manipulated, that our calendars are wrong, and that humanity has been spiritually lost because we forgot how to count our days according to heaven's clock. This isn't fiction. This is the book of Jubilees, and what you're about to hear might change everything you thought you knew about the Bible. Picture yourself in the dusty highlands of Ethiopia, where ancient monasteries cling to cliffsides like eagles' nests. Inside these sacred walls, Ethiopian monks guard something precious. While most of the Christian world rejected it, while Rome banned it, while it vanished from European Bibles, the Ethiopians kept it alive. They call it the Book of Jubilees. Others know it as Little Genesis. And for nearly 2 millennia, someone didn't want you to read it. This isn't just another ancient text gathering dust in a museum. This is a 50-chapter revelation that claims to expand and explain the book of Genesis itself. It promises to fill in the blanks, to answer questions that Genesis leaves hanging in the air like unfinished sentences. And according to its own testimony, every word was spoken by angels directly to Moses as he stood on that mountain, wrapped in the glory cloud of God's presence. But here's what makes your spine tingle. The Book of Jubilees exists in full today, primarily because one branch of Christianity refused to let it die. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, isolated by geography and history, preserved what others destroyed. They believed then, and believe now, that this book belongs in the biblical canon. They read it in their churches, they teach it to their children, and they wonder why the rest of the Christian world rejected a text that claims divine origin. Let me take you back to Mount Sinai. You know the story, right? Moses climbs the mountain, God gives him the 10 Commandments, Moses comes down with stone tablets. That's Sunday school basics. But Jubilees tells us there was more happening up there. So much more. According to this ancient text, while Moses stood in the presence of the Almighty, an angel of the presence appeared before him. This wasn't a brief encounter. This was an extensive revelation session where the angel dictated the entire history of creation, humanity's fall, and the cosmic laws that govern not just human behavior, but time itself. The angel told Moses, "Write down everything I'm about to tell you, because these are the hidden truths that explain Genesis itself." And then the angel made a stunning claim. He said that before God created Adam, before the first sunrise painted the sky, before the earth knew what a heartbeat sounded like, God created something else first: time. Not just the measurement of time, not just days and seasons, but sacred time, divine time, time structured according to heaven's perfect order. As it says in Jubilees chapter 2, God didn't merely create the universe and let it spin randomly. He organized it with mathematical precision, with cosmic rhythm, with a calendar written in the stars themselves. The angel explained that God established a solar calendar of exactly 364 days. Not 365, not the lunar calendar that would later be adopted by Jewish tradition. 364 perfect days, divided into 4 flawless seasons of 91 days each, 13 weeks per season, 52 weeks per year. And here's the beautiful part that made ancient mathematicians weep with joy. Every year begins on the same day of the week, every festival falls on the exact same date, and the Sabbath never drifts out of alignment. Why does this matter? Because according to Jubilees, when humans abandoned this divine calendar and adopted lunar calculations, they didn't just change their appointment books. They severed themselves from cosmic order. They stepped out of sync with heaven itself.
The text declares in chapter 6, verses 32 through 38, that anyone who observes months and years according to human invention rather than God's ordained system is following the way of the Gentiles, not the way of heaven. Now let's talk about the Sabbath, because Jubilees takes what you think you know and explodes it into cosmic dimensions. You probably learned that God rested on the seventh day after creating the world. Nice story about divine rest and human imitation, right? Jubilee says, think bigger. According to this ancient text, the Sabbath wasn't just established for humans to take a nap after 6 days of work. The Sabbath was written into the fabric of creation itself. It's a cosmic law observed by angels. Chapter 2, verses 17 through 21 tells us that the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification were created already observing the Sabbath. They kept it before humanity existed. They keep it still in heaven right now. The Sabbath isn't a Jewish custom or a Christian suggestion. According to Jubilees, it's the heartbeat of creation. And here's where it gets intense. The text connects the weekly Sabbath to something called Jubilee years. Every 7 years forms a sabbatical cycle. 7 sabbatical cycles equal 49 years. The 50th year is the Jubilee, when debts are forgiven, slaves are freed, and land returns to its original owners. But Jubilees takes this concept and applies it to all of history. The entire timeline of creation is measured in Jubilees. Adam's life, Noah's flood, Abraham's covenant, Moses receiving the law, everything happens according to this sacred calendar. History isn't random. According to this book, it's choreographed by heaven down to the specific day. Now we need to discuss something that makes theologians uncomfortable: the heavenly tablets. This concept appears over and over in Jubilees like a drumbeat you can't ignore. The text claims that before God ever spoke to Moses, before the 10 Commandments were carved in stone, there existed in heaven itself tablets upon which the entire law was already written. Not just the 10 Commandments, everything. All the laws, all the commandments, all the cosmic regulations that govern both spiritual and physical reality. Jubilees chapter 3 tells us that when Adam was created, angels immediately began teaching him these laws. He wasn't left to figure things out. He didn't invent morality or stumble into ethics. The angels showed him the rules written on the heavenly tablets. They taught him about Sabbath observance, about purity laws, about proper marriage, about sacrifice and atonement. Adam knew. And when Adam disobeyed, it wasn't innocent ignorance. It was rebellion against clearly revealed divine order. After Adam sinned and Cain murdered Abel, the text tells us that Seth's lineage preserved these heavenly teachings. Seth's descendants remembered the laws. They kept the calendar. They observed the Sabbaths. And according to Jubilees chapter 4, this is why Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He was perfectly aligned with cosmic law. He walked in sync with heaven's rhythm, and heaven simply absorbed him. You've probably heard the strange story in Genesis chapter 6 about the sons of God taking human wives and producing the Nephilim. Genesis gives you 3 verses and then moves on. Jubilee says, let me explain what really happened there. According to Jubilees chapter 5, a group of angels called the Watchers descended to earth with a specific assignment: watch over humanity. But they fell. They didn't just observe humans, they desired human women. They married them. They had children with them. And their offspring, the Nephilim, were giants in both size and wickedness. These beings weren't just physically large, they were spiritually corrupt. They taught humans forbidden knowledge, weapons of war, cosmetics, sorcery, astrology used for evil purposes. They twisted God's creation into chaos. The text tells us that this corruption became so severe that God looked at the earth and saw that every inclination of human hearts was only evil continually, just as Genesis 6 verse 5 records. But Jubilees adds this crucial detail. The reason for the evil wasn't just human sin. It was the supernatural pollution introduced by fallen angels. The genetic and spiritual contamination had spread so thoroughly that God decided to hit the reset button. The flood wasn't just about punishing sin. It was about cleansing creation of angelic rebellion's consequences. But here's what Jubilees emphasizes. Noah was righteous. Chapter 5, verse 19 tells us Noah was perfect in all his ways. What made him perfect? He observed the laws written on the heavenly tablets. He kept the Sabbath.
He followed the solar calendar. He maintained purity laws. Noah was the last man on earth still living in alignment with heaven's order, which is precisely why God chose him to survive and start over. When we get to Abraham, Jubilees fills in what feels like a movie prequel. Genesis tells us God called Abraham out of Ur, but it doesn't explain why God chose him specifically. Jubilees chapters 11 and 12 give us Abraham's origin story, and it's remarkable. Young Abraham grew up in a culture drowning in idolatry. His father Terah manufactured idols for a living. Everyone around Abraham bowed to statues, worshipped stars, and followed lunar calendar systems that Jubilee says disconnected them from divine truth. But somehow, young Abraham figured it out. The text tells us he studied the stars and realized they were created things, not gods. He observed the seasons and recognized divine design. He reasoned his way to monotheism before God ever spoke to him audibly. Then comes the famous story expanded in Jubilees. Abraham walked into his father's idol shop and systematically destroyed every statue. When his father raged at him, Abraham calmly explained, "These things you call gods can't even defend themselves from a teenage boy with a hammer. Why would I worship them?" Chapter 12, verse 12 through 14 records that from his youth, Abraham separated himself from idol worship and sought to serve the Creator. And here's what Jubilees emphasizes. Abraham was following the heavenly tablets before the law was given to Moses. He observed Sabbaths. He practiced circumcision. He kept purity laws. How? Because these weren't new rules invented at Sinai. According to this text, they were cosmic laws written in creation itself, and Abraham's righteousness consisted in his ability to discern and follow them even without a prophet or scripture to guide him. Genesis 22 tells the story of Abraham being commanded to sacrifice Isaac. It's one of the most disturbing passages in the Bible until the angel stops Abraham at the last second. But who told God to test Abraham? Genesis doesn't say. Jubilees chapter 17 tells us exactly who, and the answer is chilling. There was an angelic being named Mastema. Think of him as the prosecuting attorney in heaven's court. Jubilees describes Mastema as the chief of evil spirits, the accuser, essentially the role that Satan plays in the book of Job. And Mastema approached God with a challenge. He said, "Abraham loves his son more than he loves you. Test him, command him to sacrifice Isaac, and watch him refuse. He'll prove that human love always trumps divine obedience." God accepted the challenge, not because he needed to know Abraham's heart, but to publicly demonstrate Abraham's faithfulness against Mastema's accusations. The test wasn't just about a father and son on a mountain. According to Jubilees, it was a cosmic showdown between good and evil, between angelic accusation and human faithfulness. And when Abraham raised the knife, when he proved willing to obey even this incomprehensible command, the angels of the presence intervened. Jubilee says the angels shouted to stop Abraham because heaven itself was satisfied. Abraham had proven that his alignment with divine will superseded even his deepest human love.
The test was passed, Mastema was silenced, and the covenant with Abraham was sealed in that moment of radical obedience. The rivalry between Jacob and Esau gets a supernatural upgrade in Jubilees. Genesis presents them as twin brothers competing for birthright and blessing. Jubilees chapters 19 and 35 present them as representatives of two cosmic paths, righteousness versus rebellion, divine order versus chaos. Esau is portrayed not just as the outdoorsy brother who sold his birthright for soup. He's described spiritually blind, aligned with violence, and connected to forces opposing God's plan. His descendants would become Edom, and Jubilees repeatedly emphasizes that the conflict between Jacob's lineage, Israel, and Esau's lineage, Edom, represents ongoing spiritual warfare throughout history. Jacob, on the other hand, is shown as chosen before birth, protected by angels, and destined to preserve the covenant line. His 12 sons weren't accidents of biology. Jubilees chapter 28 tells us their births, their destinies, and their tribal assignments were all pre-written on the heavenly tablets. Nothing was random. The 12 tribes of Israel were a cosmic plan unfolding in human history. But the text doesn't whitewash the brothers' failures. When Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, committed sin with his father's concubine, as recorded in Genesis 35, Jubilees chapter 33 explains that Reuben lost his birthright not just as family punishment, but as cosmic consequence. The heavenly tablets had to be rewritten. Leadership passed to Judah for kingship and to Levi for priesthood. When Jacob's sons sold Joseph into slavery, they thought they were getting rid of a bratty younger brother with delusions of grandeur. Jubilees chapter 34 reveals they were actually committing a cosmic transgression. Joseph's destiny was written on the heavenly tablets. His rise in Egypt wasn't luck or political skill. It was predetermined divine plan unfolding exactly on schedule according to the sacred calendar. The text emphasizes that angels protected Joseph throughout his journey. When he was thrown into the pit, angels watched. When Potiphar's wife falsely accused him, angels testified in heaven of his innocence. When he interpreted dreams in prison, angels gave him the understanding. Joseph's entire life was a carefully orchestrated divine operation with a specific purpose: position Israel's family in Egypt at exactly the right moment in history. Jubilees chapters 46 through 48 tell us that Israel's enslavement in Egypt was foretold on the heavenly tablets. God told Abraham in Genesis 15 that his descendants would be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years. But Jubilees adds that this wasn't just a prophecy, it was part of the cosmic calendar. The timing of the oppression, the timing of the Exodus, even the specific date when Moses would confront Pharaoh, all of it was written in heaven before it happened on earth. And the plagues? They weren't just natural disasters escalating until Pharaoh broke. Jubilees presents them as divine warfare against Egypt's spiritual powers. Each plague targeted an Egyptian deity. The Nile turning to blood humiliated Hapi, the Nile god. The darkness challenged Ra, the sun god. The death of the firstborn demonstrated that Pharaoh himself, considered divine, had no power against the God of Israel. The text emphasizes that the Exodus happened on a specific date according to the solar calendar during the month of Abib on the 14th day at twilight. This timing wasn't arbitrary. It was cosmically significant, aligning earthly liberation with heavenly order. When Israel walked through the Red Sea, they weren't just escaping slavery. According to Jubilees, they were stepping back into alignment with divine time and cosmic law. So here's the question that probably brought you to this story. If the book of Jubilees claims angelic authority, if it expands our understanding of Genesis, if it was preserved by ancient Christians, why did most of the church reject it? The answers are complex and uncomfortable. First, Jubilees challenged the calendar systems that both Judaism and Christianity had adopted. The Jewish lunar calendar, still used today for calculating Passover and other festivals, directly contradicts Jubilees' solar calendar. Church leaders who wanted unity with Jewish communities couldn't embrace a text that declared their calendar spiritually invalid. Second, Jubilees emphasized law-keeping in ways that made early Christians nervous. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christian theology was moving toward grace-centered, law-freed approaches to salvation. Jubilees, with its emphasis on Sabbath observance and cosmic law written before Moses, sounded too much like works-based righteousness. Leaders feared it would confuse converts about whether they were saved by faith or by following the heavenly tablets. Third, the text's angelology was problematic. Jubilees gives angels enormous roles in creation, revelation, and daily cosmic management. Church fathers worried this elevated angels too much, potentially leading to angel worship. The book's emphasis on Mastema as a chief evil spirit also introduced dualistic ideas that some theologians thought flirted with Persian Zoroastrianism. And, perhaps most significantly, Jubilees claimed authority equal to Scripture by stating it was revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai by angels. If church leaders accepted Jubilees as authoritative,
what other texts claiming angelic origin might demand inclusion? Where would they draw the line? It was safer to reject the whole thing than to open that door. But the Ethiopians said no. They read Jubilees and saw consistency, not contradiction. They saw expansion, not competition. They believed God could reveal truth through angels and that the solar calendar made mathematical and spiritual sense. So they kept it, they copied it, they taught it, and because of them, we can read it today. As I finish this story, I'm left with questions, and I suspect you are too. Was the book of Jubilees really revealed by angels to Moses? Does God operate on a precise solar calendar that humanity abandoned? Are there heavenly tablets with our destinies written before we're born? Did angels teach Adam directly after creation? Or was Jubilees a well-intentioned attempt by ancient Jews to expand Torah, fill in Genesis gaps, and promote calendar reform? Written by humans, not angels. Here's what we know for certain. This text is ancient, preserved, and considered scripture by millions of Christians in Ethiopia. It offers detailed expansions of stories you thought you knew. It presents a cosmos more organized, more angelic, and more legally structured than most modern Christians imagine. And for reasons both theological and political, most church leaders decided you didn't need to read it. Whether you accept Jubilees as divinely inspired scripture or view it as fascinating ancient Jewish literature, one thing is undeniable. It challenges our assumptions. It asks us to consider that maybe, just maybe, there's more to the Genesis story than made it into Sunday school lessons. It suggests that time itself might be sacred, that angels might be more involved than we realize, and that God's laws might be cosmic truths rather than cultural inventions. The Book of Jubilees remains what it's always been, forbidden knowledge that refused to stay hidden. Ethiopian monks guarded it through centuries of change. Scholars translated it, and now you know the story they tried to erase. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. So what's the real lesson here? What should we take away from this ancient text that survived banning, censorship, and centuries of deliberate erasure? The Book of Jubilees teaches us something profound about truth itself. Real truth doesn't fear examination. Authentic divine revelation doesn't need to hide behind locked doors or burned manuscripts. If God is truly the author of truth, then truth can withstand scrutiny, questions, and even controversy. Think about what happened here.
Church leaders, frightened by ideas that challenged their theology and threatened their calendar systems, decided to make that choice for everyone else. They said, "We'll tell you what's true. We'll decide what you get to read. Trust us to filter divine revelation for you." And for over 1,000 years, most Christians never even knew Jubilees existed. But here's the beautiful irony. You can't kill truth by banning it. You can burn books, but ideas survive. You can exclude texts from official canons, but faithful communities will preserve them anyway. The Ethiopian Christians didn't bow to Rome's authority. They didn't delete Jubilees from their Bibles just because church councils in distant lands said so. They believed it was true, and they kept it alive. The moral lesson isn't necessarily that Jubilees is absolutely scripture and everyone else is wrong. The lesson is about intellectual honesty and spiritual courage. We should never be afraid to ask hard questions about our faith. We should never outsource our thinking to authorities who demand blind obedience. God gave you a mind, and He expects you to use it. If your faith can't survive exposure to different ideas, ancient texts, or challenging questions, then maybe your faith needs strengthening rather than protecting through ignorance. Truth that requires ignorance to survive isn't truth at all. It's fragile ideology. The Book of Jubilees also reminds us that God's story is bigger than our denominational boxes. Christianity isn't monolithic. It never was. Ethiopian Christians read 50 more chapters than most Western Christians, and they're still Christians. They love Jesus. They follow Scripture. They just have a different perspective on what Scripture includes, and that should humble us. Here's my challenge to you. Don't let anyone decide for you what you're allowed to study, question, or explore. Read widely, study deeply, compare texts, ask uncomfortable questions, and trust that if God is real, and I believe He is, then seeking truth honestly will lead you closer to Him, not further away. The Book of Jubilees was called Forbidden Knowledge, but perhaps the only truly forbidden knowledge is the knowledge we choose never to pursue out of fear. Fear that we'll discover we were wrong. Fear that our comfortable beliefs might need adjustment. Fear that truth might be more complex than we were taught. God is bigger than our fears. Truth is stronger than our doubts. And the same Spirit that inspired Scripture can guide you as you wrestle with hard questions. Don't be afraid of ancient wisdom. Engage it, test it, learn from it, and let your faith become deeper, richer, and more honest in the process. That's the real message of this forbidden book.